Well, howdy there. Y'all can only imagine how excited I am for this here video. Okay, so we Texans may not really talk like illiterate cowboys, but there's a reason for the stereotype of the gun-slinging, cattle-herding, horse-riding Texan, a stereotype that goes back nearly 2 centuries. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Six Flags, the amusement park based in Grand Prairie, Texas, but in Texas we're certainly taught just what those Six Flags stand for, that being the six modern nations that the territory of Texas has belonged to in the past 300 years, all of which have greatly impacted the cultural landscape of this great state. And as everyone knows, Texas was the only U.S. state to formerly be its own country, and hence can secede from the United States whenever it wants. Oh wait, okay, so neither of those things are true. But Texas certainly distinguishes itself as one of the most famous former countries to join the Union, and they certainly love to flaunt it. And although no state is allowed to legally secede from the United States, Texas does have a unique clause that allows it to split into 5 states under a referendum without congressional approval. But just who exactly are the old or original Texans? Well, we can all agree that technically neither Anglo-Americans nor Hispanics are native to the state of Texas, or any of the American Southwest for that matter, as Mexicans are primarily of Iberian and Mesoamerican stock. But it is true that before Manifest Destiny, a large section of the land that would become the United States belonged to the Spanish Empire, with the first European settlement in the U.S. actually being the Spanish colony of St. Augustine, established in Florida in 1565. And indeed, many Spanish explorers, priests, and conquistadors traveled from Florida through the southeast United States and into the American Southwest, and this area was soon incorporated into the Spanish Empire, with the other half of Texas being a part of the French territory of Louisiana. Because of the relative isolation of Texas, or Tejas as it was known, and these other northern territories, relatively few Spaniards settled this section of land, and even when including the various Native American tribes who made up a large majority for most of the territory's history, the population density was incredibly low, although Mexicans from other parts of New Spain did create many settlements in southern Texas, such as Laredo, El Paso, and San Antonio. Of course, there was also a not so insignificant Spanish presence in the other northern territories of New Spain, such as California, New Mexico, and very briefly Louisiana, and some of the first settlers and explorers in the region were actually from the Spanish East Indies, or in other words, the Philippines. Thus, the Spaniards and the French were the first two non-Amerindian nations to fly flags over Texas, although following the Latin American independence movements, the newly evolved Empire of Mexico inherited sovereignty over the provinces of Tejas, Nuevo Mexico, and Alta California, with parts of the modern states of Colorado, Nevada, Utah, and all of Arizona lying in the latter two, and the burgeoning American populace to the north was growing considerably, with the practically deserted northern territories of Mexico acting as a buffer state between Anglo and Hispanic North America. Due to this, the Spaniards and later Mexican government allowed a modest number of settlers from Europe and the neighboring United States to settle in Tejas and Alta California, who lived alongside the already established Hispanics known as Tejanos and Californios respectively in relative harmony, with the Anglos from the U.S. overwhelmingly hailing from the southern states, being known as the Texians. These Texian settlers very quickly began to outnumber the Tejanos in much of rural Texas, as well as various historic cities, which led to a bit of a clash of cultures considering that the Texians were largely Protestant, English-speaking, with many owning slaves, while the Tejanos were Catholic, Spanish-speaking, and slavery had been outlawed in this part of Mexico for quite some time. So although the Mexican government tolerated the American settlers, tensions were rising quickly. The Anglo-Texians, and many Tejanos as well, took advantage of an extraordinarily turbulent period for Mexican politics in order to declare their independence, with the early pioneers of Stephen F. Austin and Sam Houston being the main leaders of the Texas Rebellion or Texas Revolution, with the modern capital and largest city of Texas being named after them respectively. Mexico attempted to regain control of the rebellious territory, but it simply didn't have the resources, manpower, or motivation to defeat the Texans, and thus ushered in a new period of Texas history, wherein, by all intents and purposes, Texas was a de facto independent republic for about a decade, although Mexico refused to recognize their sovereignty, and the republic was split on whether to join the United States to the north or remain independent, and this is partially what led to the highly individualistic, somewhat isolationist, bigger is better attitude seen in many Texans to the present day. The census of New Spain in 1793 found that the overwhelming majority of California's population was of indigenous descent, while in Texas and New Mexico, most of the population was of white or mestizo ancestry, split roughly equally between these three racial groups, and by the time that Texas gained independence from Mexico in 1836, around 10,000 of the population of 70,000 were descended from the original Mexican settlers of white or mestizo ancestry, while the remainder were Anglo-Texians. Now, as you may have been able to guess, Texas would eventually vote to join the United States of America as the 28th state, an act which Mexico considered to be illegal, seeing as to how they didn't recognize Texas as a legitimate republic in the first place, and this sparked the Mexican-American War, which, although having a relatively small number of casualties, had possibly the largest change in territory of any conflict in North American history, as the Mexican territories of Alta California and Nuevo Mexico were captured and annexed by the United States, even though technically California had already declared itself independent as the short-lived California Republic, literally lasting less than a month. Andres Pico, a Mexican general who fought against the U.S., and other certain officials living in this newfound American territory were able to negotiate rights and citizenship for all the Hispanic settlers who found themselves in an entirely new country, and Pico himself actually gained full immunity from his role in the conflict and ended up fighting for the Union in the American Civil War, which goes to show that many of the Hispanos of the Southwest didn't have too hard of a time adjusting to American life and shifting their loyalties. In the United States Census, for reasons that I don't have time to get into, those with any ancestry from south of the U.S. border are counted as Hispanic or Latino, despite this neither being an ethnic or racial identifier but a cultural one. But judging from official statistics and independent estimates, in Texas, the descendants of the original Tejanos number possibly 500 to 800,000, around 2 to 4% of the population of the state, or 3 to 7% of Hispanics in the state. Not a terribly large number, but not completely insignificant either, although one has to realize that the overwhelming majority of these Tejanos identify as Mexican on the U.S. Census rather than Spanish or another ancestry. These Tejanos are mostly located in the southern portion of Texas, especially El Paso, San Antonio, or Houston, and many may not even be aware of their unique heritage, as there has been frequent intermixing with newer Hispanic immigrants and Anglo-Texians alike, and the majority of the Tejano community speaks English as a first language and is mostly assimilated into American culture, but of course with certain cultural practices such as their Roman Catholic faith. Judging from other estimates, the number of Californians with ancestry from back when California was under Spanish or Mexican jurisdiction is 400 to 600,000, about 2 to 3% of the state's Hispanic population, with the only state where pre-immigration Hispanic populations constitute a large segment of the population being New Mexico, where around 50 to 60% of the state's Hispanics can accurately trace their heritage to settlers in Nuevo Mexico before it was annexed by the United States. And there are also smaller numbers of these pre-immigration Hispanics or Hispanos in the former Spanish Louisiana, as well as the former Spanish territories in the other parts of the American Southwest, since California, New Mexico, and Texas were divided up to form the other states of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. In the meantime, migrants from Louisiana settled mostly in the southeast part of Texas, those from Alabama in the east central, Georgia in the east, Mississippi in the south, and Missouri in the north, which creates a fascinating collage that still influences the modern cultural landscape of the state of Texas to this very day. But of course, Americans from other states have also greatly impacted the region, as I can personally attest, having traveled most of the state, my father being a German American from California, and my great-great-great-great-grandfather on my mom's side was a former slave from Alabama, and I even have a Mexican uncle out in West Texas. Of course, European migration was always one of the core factors to growth in the state of Texas post-annexation, and other than the Anglo-Celtic stock of the average Southern American, Texas is known throughout the U.S. as having an extensive and quite historic German community stretching back before Mexico gained independence from Spain. In fact, after the Battle of San Jacinto during the Texas Revolution, it was two Germans on either side that negotiated and translated, as none of the Texan troops knew Spanish and none of the Mexican troops knew English. There are also large numbers of Czechs, Poles, and other Slavs in central Texas, with the region in fact having some of the last speakers of the endangered Sorbian or Wendish language outside of Germany. Texas experienced rapid demographic change in the decades following the Civil War, as blacks decreased as a percentage from a third of the population to only a fraction of that amount due to emigration in northern cities, although they still make up large minorities in prominent cities along with rural, eastern, and central Texas. The second demographic shift was the migration of large numbers of Hispanics, mostly Mexicans from Nuevo Leon and other border states, but also Central Americans to the southern counties, which always had a strong Hispanic majority since the state was admitted, but has since become a highly homogeneous Tex-Mex bilingual culture in some areas. And of course, quite recently there's been an influx of Asian migrants, mostly Vietnamese, Indians, and Chinese, to large cities and especially suburbs that are part of the Texas Triangle, that being the urban conglomeration lying between Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. So Texas truly is unique among the American states, not for the rubbish I stated at the beginning that is frequently pawned off as facts, but because of the unique history and cultural landscape that has been impacted by so many various waves of migration from other states, other European countries, and of course the plethora of Native American tribes and the old Texans of Hispanic ancestry who predate the formation of the Republic. California's alright too, I guess. I'll probably start doing more videos with an emphasis on individual American states in the near future, so go ahead and let me know your thoughts on Texas history and the Hispanos of the Southwest, and for today's poll, tell me which old Spanish community of the Southwest is of the most interest to you. And as always, yeehaw and all that. This has been Mason, and I'll catch you next time, partner.